If something happens and it goes shitty, you're the guy. Like, understand what that means. When the phone rings and the press lines up, you're the guy in front of the cameras. I'm going to be like the Senate hearing and lean in and tell you to not say anything, but understand in front of the camera, you're the guy. And if you're good with that, so am I, because I got another meeting to go to. But understand what that means. I don't know if you've ever had this. I'm watching a teleprompter, I'm watching a former world leader and an audience of about 5,000 to 7,000 people, and the cursor kept backspacing on the teleprompter because they're wiping out the questions on the way. I thought I was going to have a stroke. I'm trying to focus on the president and look at the crew and try to answer questions. Finally, I just gave up and we just started winging it. And that's probably the best interview I've ever done in my career.
Welcome to Beyond Checkbox Compliance, the podcast where we challenge the status quo of cybersecurity. I'm Devon, CEO of RESTIV Technology. And in every episode, I'll be sitting down with the sharpest minds in industry to dismantle myths, confront uncomfortable truths, and unpack the strategies that actually protect businesses in today's unpredictable digital world. In a field flooded with fear-driven tactics and checkbox solutions, this show is different. We're not here to scare you, we're here to empower you. So whether you're a seasoned pro, business leader looking for clarity, or just someone who's curious about how to truly stay secure, you've come to the right place. Let's go beyond the bare minimum and start redefining what cybersecurity can and should be.
Today on Beyond Checkbox Compliance, hosted by Devon, we're cutting through the noise with a security leader who doesn't just talk about risk, he transforms how organizations think about it. Tim McCreight has spent over 40 years in the trenches of physical and cybersecurity, shaping strategies that are practical, resilient, and built to align with business goals. He's a mentor, a storyteller, and the founder of Tailcraft Security, where security isn't a roadblock, it's a strategic advantage. And when you're trusted to do a live in-person interview with President George W. Bush, you know you're doing something right. Please enjoy this candid and timely conversation between RESTIV's Devon and Tailcraft's Tim McCreight.
Hey Tim, great to see you again. I was trying to think how many years it's been since we last crossed paths. It's kind of cool to see that you've taken that leap to the entrepreneurial journey about a year and a half behind us. But yeah, when was it that we last connected?
Oh wow, it's been a while, and you're right. It's been a little while since we connected last, but I'm really proud to see that you folks have. It's been like over 2 years now for the company, and that's awesome for you folks on RESTIV. And Tailcraft's a little further behind. It's been that I call myself the inadvertent CEO. This is not what I really wanted to do in my career at this stage in the career. I wasn't thinking of starting up my own company or getting it up and going, but Jesus, here we are. So let's go. And I just decided to lean into it, and my wife Lisa supported it. We've got a number of folks who are working with us on contract as well. So we've taken off in the short period of time that we have. It's been a blast. It's something I probably should have done a while ago. You know what I mean? Like it's something I should have stepped into a while ago because I've been this passionate about security for so long. It's just taken me a little while to get to this space. But now that I'm here, now it's a chance. It's my time now to help and give back and watch others grow.
So did you have that kind of same little period of anxiety of, I've, just started up a business. Do I call myself CEO? Do I use founder? Did you... Right?
Every morning I wake up, man, I'm like, holy crap, what is like it is. Do you know what the scary part is that it's when you, and you must know this, right? Because you do everything, right? I'm doing everything. I got to go do marketing, and I was just before this. I got off the phone from the accountant doing the 2024 tax filing. Awesome. And I'm like, oh crap, you mean I got to sign off on this? And what do you mean I got to phone CRA to like light up my payroll account for 2025? Are you serious? And I'm like, this is unreal. But what I've done though is I have a whiteboard in my office, and I keep listing all the things I didn't think I needed to do. And I've had to wipe that board and start over twice now. It's like, well, what do you mean I got to do marketing and I got to do sales? And for me, it's been amazing because what I've had to do is really stretch myself. So it's not a corporate gig anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm not a CISO or a CSO. Now I'm actually the one making the decision on the clients that we want to work with, on the vision and the mission and the goals of Tailcraft and what I want the company to stand for. So that means a lot. So it's taken me a little while to get to the point where I feel truly comfortable talking about what I'm doing and how we can actually help. And I just came back from a workshop that I was doing in Edmonton yesterday. And on the way home on the highway, folks were calling me going, thanks so much, this is awesome. When can you come back up? And our company wants you to do the same thing, but for our group. And I'm like, super cool. And it dawned on me when I finally got home. So this is what it means to be an entrepreneur. Okay, this is perfect. But you must have gone through the same thing, and you probably still are going through the same thing, right? Like you wake up every morning going, okay, what do I get to do today as founder, CEO, bottle washer, dog walker, whatever you're calling yourself that day?
Yeah, I'll say I have definitely learned more in the last 18 months than probably the last 12 years. Like it has definitely been, because you're doing all of these different things, and some of them are not necessarily things that I wanted to learn how to do. It rounds you out, right? And every day is a new challenge, new adventure. So yeah, and so I'd be curious to know, and it has been interesting for me to see all of the. There seem to be a lot of past CIO, CISO, other C-suite leaders that there seem to be kind of two paths. It's either leave a big role, like you were at is it the like when we crossed paths last, I think you were with the Alberta government, if I remember correctly, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. You betcha.
So a lot of people seem to, it's go join one of the big four, big consulting firms or Accenture, or it seems like there are a lot of our peers that have also decided to kind of launch their own venture and take the entrepreneurial leap. What was for you as you were kind of looking what came next? What was the main thing that drew you to the joys of entrepreneurial pursuits?
Yeah, I had another word other than joy, but sure, we'll start with that for now. I think, part of it was, so I was president of ASS in 2023, and I had the honor of serving as the volunteer president for that global association. And I started my year, it's a tradition for every president taking on is what's your focus for the year, right? And that's one of the things they interview you in November, December before everything starts. Your year gets chaotic January 1st because it's go. And one of the things I talked about is this idea that when I was a kid growing up in Edmonton, we weren't the richest family on the block. No, not even close. Like, my dad was one of those guys who worked two jobs just to keep things moving for us so we could go out on holidays and that. But we learned early on that the thing that we needed to define ourselves as human beings was how we help others. So for us, it was always, if you're out there shoveling the sidewalk, well, you're already out there, just keep shoveling the neighbors and the neighbors on the other side. If we were cutting grass as kids with the lawnmower, Same thing. The lawnmower's already running. You may as well just keep cutting the grass for the others. And my mom had this amazing backyard. It was all garden. And she grew more than we could ever eat. So the neighbors benefited from what my mom gave, to others to help out. And my old man was a master mechanic, so I think virtually every car, lawnmower, everything in that neighborhood, that engine ended up in his garage one time or another. So we grew up with this idea that for us to help, to give back, and to watch others grow, it's what's been driving me for most of my career. After the year I spent as the president for ASS, and I had a chance I'm going to point to a picture, me interviewing President George W. Bush on stage. So I had an hour with a world leader. And I got a chance to listen to someone, so even he's outside of the public service, he's no longer serving his country. He's still serving those who serve the country with all the work he's doing with veterans and the work he's still doing with charitable associations. I thought that was really amazing. So when it came time for me to decide what I wanted to do after I got laid off from Apollo, I talked to Lisa, my wife, and we both went, you know what, you've always wanted to find a way to help and to give back and to grow. So that's what started Telegraphed, is how can I help? How can I help organizations get better at what they do and build a better program? How can I give back to professionals so that they don't have to spend the 45 years I did to get to where I am today? And then how can I watch others grow and give them skills that they can use, practical skills that they can take to work the next day and help grow their career? And that's what drives the business.
And that's awesome. And I gotta ask, because I haven't had the honor or pleasure of meeting a former president in that way, but I've heard that he's one of those people that is when you meet him, you've got his full attention. It's almost kind of very apparently it's a lot of, that's the most common thing that I've heard, is that he's focused on you. You feel like you're the kind of the center of the universe, and that he genuinely cares, right? And so that where there's a lot of virtue signaling and things that go on in the world today now, was that, I got to ask before we dive back into the cybersecurity side of things, yeah.
No, you're bang on, Devon. So it took about 3 months to just back and forth with his team to get the questions, right? And that was just 3 months of questions. And then then friends in Ottawa started calling me saying, hey, so someone's been checking in on your former NATO secret clearance. I went, yeah, let it go. It's a Secret Service. They want to make sure I'm not some terrorist or something. I'm going to be on stage with their boss. Let it go. When we finally got to the day of, Secret Service asked me to come like a few hours early, and I went, okay, great. So I must have shown, I think I was there like 6:37 in the morning. They didn't physically pat me down. They didn't need to. I think there was like 4 of them around me the entire time I was there watching my every move. And I thought that was hilarious, but I got to talk to them. I got a chance to actually listen to their stories about their protectee, about the president. And they love him. Like they actually enjoy the work that they do with him because they just love him as a person. You know, they were even showing me pictures of them on holidays or them bike riding with the president or on the golf course or being with them. I think I convinced 3 of them to join ASS as well, which was awesome. So I did my job. When the president came, I didn't say a whole lot until it was almost time to go on the stage. And all I remember saying is, so who's going to interview me today? And where's the Canadian? And I put my hand up and I said, that'd be me, Mr. President. And he kind of shooed everybody else out of the green room except for him and one Secret Service agent and me. He said, so when we go up on stage, and he put his hand on my shoulder and he looked at me and said, let's just have some fun. He said, let's go out there and let's just have some fun. And I went, oh, wow, that's awesome. So off we went. And for an hour, it was amazing to listen to him. The script that we had went out the window after the first 5 minutes because he had his own stories he wanted to tell, and me asking questions, wasn't going to work. So I don't know if you've ever had this. I'm watching a teleprompter, I'm watching a former world leader and an audience of about 5,000 to 7,000 people, and the cursor kept backspacing on the teleprompter because they're wiping out the questions on the way. I thought I was going to have a stroke. I'm trying to focus on the president and look at the crew and try to answer a question. I just gave up, and we just started winging it. And that's probably the best interview I've ever done in my career. But afterwards, he sat with me for 10 minutes. And you're right, Devon, you nailed it. He sat and he talked to me. He asked me questions about my mom and my brother. He asked me what it was like to work for the government. He'd done his homework, right? But it felt like I was talking to my dad at the far end of it. That was really cool. Out of everything, that's the part I remember. That 10 minutes in the green room just before I got in the Suburban and drove away. That time, that was unbelievable. I'd pay to do that all over again just for that 10 minutes to be with him again.
Very cool. Yeah, maybe someday I'll have an opportunity like that. We did, maybe the closest thing I could say that I've had to that is in the nearly 25 years with my Army Reserve Unit, the King's Own Calgary Regiment. Our Colonel in Chief was the Queen. And so there were three times where she came to visit because she was our Colonel in Chief, so she would come and visit. And I remember the thing that really stuck with me was that, each of these meetings would have been, somewhere between 5 years apart. And I was just blown away at how, she actually remembered. And this is, I don't know whether they actually remember or if I believe it is actually, there's some people have that ability to really remember all of these details, but she was remembering things that we talked about 5 years ago about my family and other things. And
that's awesome.
I could barely remember those things. And I think that is those great, great world leaders, that is, that ability to just make you feel like the center of the world. And
that's good for you, man. Just to feel that must have been pretty amazing for someone, I don't know, like a member of the royalty, the queen of the royal family, to actually have that memory of the conversation. That's amazing. Good for you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. So maybe now let's maybe get back to the cybersecurity for
sure,
a minute.
Sure.
So I'm curious. So you're 6 months into this, and so obviously you've started to kind of get a bit of a feel for where there's a need, where there's some gaps, and you said you've already started to get a bit of feedback as to what people are finding helpful or getting asked back. Like, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? Where are you seeing people needing the most help right now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One of the things that we really focused on early with Intelcraft is this concept that from a risk-based perspective, designing and developing programs using a risk-based approach will benefit you far further today and into the future than simply a technical response. So we've structured our programs so that everything we work with our clients is understanding first the human element, and understanding the culture and the acceptance of security in your organization, and then designing controls. You and I both know and from a cybersecurity perspective, you can pick any control you want. And there's thousands of them out there. You can identify the technology, put it in the rack, stack it up, get it going, get it configured, etc. But a human being will circumvent that if they don't understand and accept the concept of security. And from a cultural perspective, if your organization doesn't embrace the value that security brings into your company or into the value proposition, any program you put into place, any control you put into place, it's going to get circumvented, and that puts you at risk. So we took a different tactic when we first started looking at how to work with our clients and listen to their needs. So we started asking cultural questions first. How is security perceived? Is the value of security recognized at the executive level and even down to the line level? We even ask questions like, does it really bother you when you have to change your password every 90 days? Just to get this concept of where are you in your space? Like, where are you in your acceptance of security? And we try to bring in personal ideas too. It's like, so, do you look at security the same way you do at your home? Like when you walk out of your home every day, what do you do when you leave your house? And we listen to the answers because we ask the same questions. And it's, everything from I lock the door and turn off all the lights and make sure the dogs are set, and then I drive to work. Awesome. Well, what do you do at work? Does it follow through the same? Do you follow the same approach? So when we understand the cultural components and what can or cannot work from a human perspective, then we can actually identify and build out a security program that addresses those risks. And then we can make recommendations on the types of controls you could put into place to support the program. So we try to reverse engineer that entire process by focusing on the human first, and then work your way through the rest of it.
That is interesting, novel.
Scary.
Well, no, and I'm processing because I'm trying to think what that would look like, because I think we all know that we wouldn't have jobs in cybersecurity if we didn't have people who make some questionable decisions from time to time, or deliberate decisions, right? As you made that point of users, people deciding, is this something that matters to me? Do I care? Right? One of my favorite stories early on in my days from Enbridge in the early days when we were just, in the early days of the, FireEye, and we were just starting to have those real time abilities to detect the advanced malware. And I remember we had, it was before the time where you could actually block them in real time. So you would get these emails that the user would get the email with the malicious attachment. They would immediately after that get an email that says, don't open the email just before this because it's malicious or something along those lines. And then multiple times we had conversations with users who, when we talked to them afterwards, after their machine had been infected and all those types of things, we asked them like, okay, well, why did you do that? We could see that you opened the email that says, don't open the email before this and don't open the attachment. So you opened that email first and then you opened the other email. And double clicked it. What? Help me understand that. And the answer was, well, I wanted to see what would happen. I was curious, and I clicked it, and then nothing happened. Right. And so I think about that because at the end of the day, to your point, no matter what controls you put in place, no matter what stick you try to use to punish or threaten or anything like that, at the end of the day, if it's not something that people value or understand, or they understand the connection to their business, then it doesn't matter. You're always going to have gaps in your human firewall, right? Exactly,
and that was one of the things that really drove early on what we wanted to do with Tailcraft, is this idea that can we focus on that? But what I found too is, and you know this too, Devon, from your past, how many times have you gone through and reviewed a policy structure or a governance framework or the most recent standards and procedures? And when was the last time they were updated? When was the last time you revised them? When did you adapt them or change them to meet the new technology? When's the last time an organization you've seen in the last 3 years updated their standards and their governance framework to incorporate AI, or the use of AI, or the appropriate use of AI? So we're finding that now, and the questions that we ask is, well, who manages this? Well, that's so and so, and we only do that once every couple of years, but technology changes like once a week now. So again, it comes back to, from my perspective, how do you get the human engaged in it so that they do see the value of updating their governance framework? They do see the value of addressing risks. They do see the value of looking for potential threats to their environment on a regular basis and doing that on an iterative approach. And how can you make it easier for somebody to embrace that as a new hobby or a new skill or a new habit? And it isn't so much, enforcement doesn't work anymore. At least I haven't seen it successfully work. And after 40 some years of doing this, enforcement is one of the last things that we try to focus on. It's engagement first, it's collaborative second, and then I try to work on opportunities for compliance, then governance, and the last part of the train is the enforcement mechanism. And you've seen this as well from a personal perspective. The stick doesn't work when that's the first thing you use. It doesn't. If you can bring people into that discussion, if I can get people engaged, if they can start seeing the value of what we're trying to do from a security perspective, and if I can draw that line from every control I put into place, I can show you how it's supporting the business. If I can make that line, then the business accepts the controls we wanted to place, I think, more readily, because now I can see the business value of the security program, not the cost. Right? Because you and I have both been in that world before. The first thing they ask us, how much is it going to cost? Well, what if we said, what if I can help you achieve your goals and objectives? Now, can we have a different conversation? And we're starting to have that now. We're starting to see that change in the conversation by, can I talk to you about a business value and how I can enable the business? As opposed to, hey, yeah, that new FireEye is going to cost me about $30,000, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's I'd like to double click on that one, because that is, I'll say, something that we've been seeing as well. That, while I think a lot of people, GRC, governance, risk, and compliance was like a 4-letter word for a lot of people. It was,
it still is for many. Yeah.
Or the team or person leading the governance, risk, and compliance side of things was kind of like the awkward cousin that nobody really wanted to invite to the party, right? But I think we maybe have been kind of going down a parallel path here, where we've been trying to break it down into a few simple questions to help people understand how it connects back to the business, back to their core business objectives and their strategy. And so the way we've tried to position that is, rather than focusing on, I need my, the payment card industry, right, PCI DSS, or I need to have NERC or any one of those many acronyms that get thrown around for compliance requirements. We instead say, okay, well, what must you or should you do from a business perspective? And in that case, it's not just what are your compliance requirements. The other part of it is what's the actual business context, right? So to your point there of, okay, how does this connect to your strategy? In some cases, you may have a compliance requirement that, okay, yes, it's a compliance requirement, but the cost or impact to your business of not being compliant could be negligible, right? So if you're not non-compliant with some obscure regulation in somewhere that you barely do business, then, do you necessarily need to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to be compliant with everything, when, there could be another part of your business where there's no compliance requirements, but there's a material risk to the business if you don't mitigate that risk. Like that's how we like to try to frame it, is link everything back to, and in most cases, we try to translate everything to dollars, right? Because at the end of the day, whether it's a regulatory fine or if it's a lost production or what have you, you can translate almost anything into a dollar value. So maybe back to what I wanted to double click on there. So the term risk-based approach is thrown around a lot. I'm pretty sure that most people that utter those words don't understand what it means. So help me. How do you bridge that gap, and how do you explain that to someone that maybe hasn't spent decades in the governance, risk, and compliance space?
No, good question, and I think you're right, Devon. I think we're paralleling how our two companies operate. It's cool to hear, because you're right. The first question I always get is when we say risk-based. Well, what do you mean by risk? And I finally decided that my best answer has always been, I look at what ISO 31000, which is a globally accepted standard on risk, is. And it's the first sentence. It's the effect of uncertainty on objectives. It could be positive or negative. It's an effect, though. Mm-hmm. And if you have a mission, vision, goal, and objectives, if something impacts that objective, that could be a risk. So what we do then is, the next step we take is, now we try to understand everything we can about the business. So in context, similar to how your approach is, do I understand how the business operates? Why is the business in there in the first place? Can you explain to me why you exist? And then, to your point earlier, what are the different arenas that you operate within? What's the different governance and legislative structures you have to comply with? What are the things that you have to meet to achieve your goals and objectives? Awesome. Once we get through that phase, our next approach with the client is to understand what are the assets you need in place every day to meet your goals and objectives. Once we identify those and we're clear about them and who owns them and who's accountable for them, who's responsible for them, we then collaborate with the client across different divisions within the organization, and then we start looking at risks. What are the risks that could potentially impact the asset? Because those are the assets you need in place every day. When we work through that exercise with understanding what are the risks, we work with that same team then to come up with, and how do I mitigate the risk? How can I find a practical way to reduce the risk? Or, and this sounds so counterintuitive, but, and sometimes you're just going to accept the risk. Because to your point, if there's this obscure requirement for me to have a compliance framework in place for a market I will never or rarely ever move into, is it worth the hundreds of thousands of dollars of a compliance exercise? Right? Is this a risk I'm willing to take from a financial perspective? Can I make a business decision? And we give the business the opportunity to make that decision. Because in the framework we design, which is it's based on enterprise security risk management, it begins and ends with the business. See, this is awesome because normally I got my dogs barking in the background, so this is awesome, right? So,
Hey there, if you're listening to this and not watching the video, I'm the producer of Beyond Checkbox Compliance, and Devon just has to take a quick minute to help out his son. We'll be right back.
I'd like to go a bit deeper on a couple things there. And there's two aspects, and I'll say it's either end of the spectrum. And I had this discussion with our new chief legal officer. We just released that. Michael got a press release out for us earlier today on that. And so as I was working with him to explain and learn a bit more about cybersecurity, he kind of asked, well, how do you help a board or an executive team or someone else? How do you help them understand, well, what's good enough, right? Because at this point, let's say, all right, we've now gone through that process and we've identified a material risk to the business, and we've identified some sort of a plan of action to mitigate it. How far do I go? Like, how much do I spend? What's enough in the end to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, good question. And I mean, you're never going to have enough budget to fix all the problems that you have. You're never going to be able to solve, or I don't think you will ever completely address a truly material risk in an organization, because that demonstrates there's a systemic issue that you're going to have to focus on as well. But what I recommend to our clients and to the boards of directors that we work with as well is you need to understand what's the practical approach to reduce the risk, and what are the types of controls you're going into place. One control will typically not solve a problem. Multiple controls will. And that means you have to have them in the different layers, whether they're a detective control or preventive control, right? You need to make sure that you're covering the approaches to the risk from multiple angles. So you're trying to overlay your potential defenses against what you've uncovered. And what's the cost? So how we've done this before in the past, and I don't know that it's going to hold anymore in the future, is that you always looked at how much am I spending on it and what's my return on investment over time. But I think, Devon, you and I both know that ROI equation, that was antiquated from the time it first came out. Right? I'm going to spend $100,000 and save $1 million. Really? Can you qualify $1 million loss? Most can't. But what we can do is say, if we spend $100,000 to reduce this risk, the potential is there that you can continue to achieve your goals and objectives for the business. And then the business can decide what's that worth, right? So what I like to do too is, I think there needs to be, in alignment with what you're talking about or what you've asked, there also needs to be some education and awareness provided to executives and to members of the board of the questions you need to start asking your security team, to the point where we've actually created a course with that. And we're going to be starting to train board members and executives. If you have a security team and they've uncovered a risk, these are questions now you need to start asking. So I want to create a different type of communication between the security team and the board, because I've come from organizations where it was adversarial at best, problematic at worst, and more importantly, you rarely got to see the board, or if you did, it was for 15 minutes every quarter, and it was just enough to get a good cup of coffee, give your presentation, and then walk out of the room and hope that they understood it. No, we need to get better at that. Why can't the chief information security or chief security officer spend as much time as your new chief legal counsel, as HR, as operations, to understand where the organization is going, its business goals and objectives, and what can I do as a chief executive to reduce the risks against those goals and objectives? Isn't that the role security is supposed to play in an organization?
Yeah, and there's so much to unpack there, because there's new mandatory disclosure requirements.
Yes,
there's the fallout from the SEC v SolarWinds case. There's all sorts of kind of emerging things happening there, and I'm gonna so a few things there. One, I need to connect you with Kent, right? Because he was the one who was asking about some of these things of how do you help the board understand those things. I'd love to learn a bit more about that training program that you've got, because that definitely sounds very very valuable. Where I know he's interested, and I think that a lot of other executives and boards would be interested in, is how do they get to the point where they understand when does an incident become something that is that requires disclosure to a regulatory body or something like that. I mean, the other reason that my day was a little bit delayed with you this morning is that we were helping one of our clients with a major cyber incident. And one of the questions that Kent asked is, okay, well, now that we've uncovered some new information as part of the incident response investigation, there's now going to be a bit of a back to that four-letter word in cybersecurity of GRC.
Yes,
From a governance perspective, now what's the obligation of that management team, that executive team, to now disclose that to their regulating body? And to your point, I think this is one of those things that for a long time in many organizations, IT has been kind of pushed off to the side, and
yes,
those types of risks were not really considered. Yeah, tell me how is this materializing in your discussions, and what does that look like from your perspective?
No, it's a great question, and I think we're going to see more of this over the next 3 to 5 years. And you're right, there's been changes. The SEC has posted changes to their filings in the Form 40s and 40s for organizations, naming the CISO, naming their incident response procedures, and then the disclosure process that they have in case an incident becomes an event becomes a disclosable event. So I think that there's a couple of things that we need to focus on. One, this idea that to become a resilient organization, you need to have the processes in place to identify, just to your point, Devon, from an event, like an incident occurred, it's now an event, now it's a security event, now we have to disclose it. So I think it's on every organization to develop a resilience approach, not just an incident response procedure, and not just a procedure to contain, but a procedure to become resilient from. And the only way that we're all going to learn how to be more resilient is to share the information. And this is going to sound horrific for almost every cybersecurity professional out there. But I'm becoming, I know that, I'm probably going to get crucified for this, but I'm becoming more and more of a fan of, we need to start disclosing as best we can more information as we can.
Yep.
And here's why. Because the bad guys have figured out, and me having spent about a year understanding more about threat intelligence and getting a chance to see how the other side of the web works and what they can use to their advantage, what they use better than we ever can is sharing information. So what shocked me was just the sheer magnitude of information that's translated back and forth between different groups to help them achieve their goal and objective, which is break into systems, steal information, make money. Honest to God, it was unbelievable to see how well orchestrated that process of information sharing is. Like even right down to the auctioning of credentials from an initial access broker, and how structured it is, the information they provide, the detail they provide with every email address that they sell, including when it was, like, it's fantastic. What do you get whenever you share information with another security team? Jack.
Yep.
What do you get when you actually read a disclosure report to the SEC or to someplace else? A filtered list from a lawyer.
Yep.
What do we actually need to hear from other corporations? The how. Like the how. And we're not getting that. We're getting the after effect. We're getting the patch that they did. We're getting the fix that we put into place. We're getting the how many records were sold. At this point, most times, I'm just assuming that everything is gone. But what you need to tell me is the how, so that I'm not going to be the same victim that you are. Or can I learn from what you're doing? Because we're either pride or something else has gotten in the way where we don't want to share if something bad happens. We just want to make sure we get it out there as quickly as we can, close it up and move on. But we all need to learn from it, because the only way as security professionals we get better at what we do is if we learn. And we're not giving ourselves that opportunity to start sharing information. ISACs have been in place for a long time to try to share information. They're trying to share forced disclosure so that it's a publicly accessible document. That's not going to work either. But we need to start getting better at sharing information back and forth between security professionals, either after an event immediately occurs or while it's occurring, so you can help them understand what to do to protect themselves against from that type of attack, We're still not great at that. And it's been, how many years has it been? Like, internet's been around since the 94, 95. We're still not good at sharing information. But I promise you, the folks on the other side of the web, they are fantastic at sharing information.
Yeah, wasn't there something that happened in 2001 where one of the key lessons learned from that was that people need to share intelligence? What was that again? Right?
Yeah, imagine that. Hey, holy smokes! But doesn't that just annoy you that you and I've been doing this for long enough to know that when you sit in a restaurant or a bar with somebody after a conference, and that's when you actually get to hear the real stuff, because then people want to share. How can we create that bar-like atmosphere in a more structured approach, where if something was occurring to the point that you brought up, you were dealing with a client that was going through an issue. What if you were able to share at least a portion of that issue to a broader community so we could all learn from it the day that it's occurring, right?
Yeah.
So that you could actually share that as a fellow security professional under whatever Chatham House rules you want to put into place. But now you're able to do that and use that information so that my client may not be impacted by it.
Yeah, and there's two things there that I'm actually going to tie back to your kind of opening story of kind of helping others and shoveling your neighbor's sidewalk and mow their lawn, right? I had this thought a while back, and there's two pieces of this. One was something similar to what you're saying, of some sort of a mechanism where you could have that much more open isn't the right word, but rapid sharing of information. So almost like swarm theory, where, when something happens, you've got this automatic orchestration of whatever, pushing information or coming together as a community to help out. The other side of that, though, is actually on the incident response side of things. I always look at other industries and think, are there things and concepts that we can learn from other industries that we could apply to cybersecurity, right? So you think about when I was back to another Enbridge situation. So I took the ICS.
Instant command system. You betcha.
Instant command system training, and so went really deep into that. Also on the Army Reserve side of things, we use the ICS for domestic operation. Well, we get people trained in it to help with domestic operations, so that we can then plug into the civilian incident response instant command systems, basically.
Gotcha.
But if you back to the old Canadian, help your neighbors and those types of things. A lot of the communities and businesses up north in those remote communities, and I'm talking up north Alberta, up north Canada, right? Have these mutual support agreements, and I've often looked at I don't know, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. I'm not sure what the TAM is for cyber incident response firms, but it is kind of one of those things that I look at and I think, to your point, if we were better at sharing information, if we were better at helping each other out and kind of stopping the bleeding sooner, it wouldn't be a hundreds of billions per year industry, because it would just be stopped so much faster. Anyways, that's
no, and I'm with you. I agree. I mean, let's look. There's some examples that we could take real notice from and learn from. So most recently, the California wildfires. It took less than a week and a bit for Canadian aircraft, Canadian firefighters, LA proper called in virtually all of all of California firefighters to come and help out. So can you imagine if we were able to do the same thing? I mean, we call it firefighting anyway in the cybersecurity when you're dealing with stuff. What if we followed the same approach, where we were able to? What if we could call in folks from other industries that are similar to ours to help us out, or at least to give us some hints, tips, techniques? What if you knew, so Devon CISO for a company A and is being hit and targeted by somebody, but Tim's CISO for company B, and I've got somebody who's been skilled in this because we've trained on this. Why can't I just send my guys to your company to help out? Why can't we do that? But we don't, right? So we don't. And this is the problem, is that we're not sharing at that level, but we see. How many times have we sent our power crews down to the States after a storm? How many times how many companies sent their teams to Quebec during some of the storms there? And you've been involved in some of those domestic events. What happens when you have a tornado, a flood, a forest fire, a power outage, an ice storm? We call in reserves and resources from across the country and from other parts of the U.S., and they come and help. why the hell can't we do that on the cyber side? It's because either pride, fear, or liability raises its head. We get afraid because, oh my God, someone's going to see that we got hit. No, everyone's going to get popped. Your goal is to make sure you can recover from it as quickly as you can. And if your neighbor can help you along the way, why not just keep shoveling the sidewalk to the next person's house?
Yeah, and this is something I've given a lot of thought over the years, and so this is another thing we'll put on the list for you and I to chat with Kent about, because we were, and this is kind of the cool thing for me is, so obviously my career, my profession has been technology and cybersecurity for my whole career, and then I've got the Army Reserve experience as well. But what's been really cool, bringing Kent into the business and helping him learn a bit about how the industry works, it's been interesting to see, when I think back to a lot of the challenges that we've had with contracts and other things over the years, a lot of them do boil down to it's the risk of liability and all those types of things. And so he started bringing some really interesting ideas about how we may be able to look at some ways to help drive innovation, again, by taking concepts that have been in place and used in the energy sector for many years to introduce more of a shared risk, shared reward model in the technology sector. Now, that in that case, we were talking about how could we kind of move past this concept where, or this common belief in the industry that, if you've got a big transformational project, you got to go spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on a big firm. But at the same time, everybody recognizes that I think it's something like 85% of those like large mega projects end up failing in the end, right? So how do you maybe create something where there's that shared risk reward? And I think that the legal side of things is actually where we can make that happen. I bring that back to thinking about what are the things that are preventing us from being able to do that type of thing. I think it is also on the legal side of things. It's right. If we had these types of agreements in place up front, and I think that's what those mutual aid agreements look like for a lot of the municipalities and businesses, is they've actually worked through all of those, and I think it probably gets into cost sharing and liability and certifications and all those types of things. But it feels like if they can figure out how to do those types of things when people's lives are on the line, and you're talking about, in some cases, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars worth of assets at risk, can't we figure it out with ones and zeros?
I'm with you. And I mean, so, the first half of my career was in physical security. And I had the honor of working for a number of companies, running their security programs, the physical side. And we had, and you talk about mutual aid, we actually had mutual aid. We had a shared be on the lookout for. So if someone was in our facility, or I had identified on our CCTV system, somebody's stealing something, or we thought, we had way back, I shouldn't say back in the day, but it feels this way. Back in the day, we remember when people were stealing laptops because they didn't want the data. They wanted the RAM, because RAM chips were so expensive. So they were stealing, like they were either ripping RAM out of out of desktops or laptops, but they were selling it for the RAM. And we would capture images of people leaving our building, with a bag tucked underneath them. But we would send that image from our CCTV to the different downtown buildings, or to the different malls. And we were lucky. We actually had about an 80% hit rate where we could see the person in the next building, because they worked in packs, right? They would hit one building and then after lunch hour go to another building. So their job was to get as many buildings they could in downtown core, hustle the RAM chips out of them. We would find the tossed husk of a laptop in a garbage bin in the back alley, because it wasn't the data, it was the hardware. Yeah, I'm dating myself. That's really bad. But anyway, that's so. But we created this structure where it was a mutual aid society, and it was really, we were helping each other in the downtown cores because we're trying to avoid the thefts. And then we started sharing best practices. Well, okay, if this floor keeps getting hit, what are you doing to protect the floor? Well, what are you guys doing? And then we would share, right? We'd meet for coffee. We'd talk about, we put these types of locks in, or we actually got our staff to do this. And we watched the thefts reduce over time, because we worked together as a community, as opposed to an individual protecting just my building, where you're not taking into account that, especially on the cyber side with the zeros and ones, it's not just you. You're not. As soon as you are on the internet, you are part of a global community. So what are we doing to help protect that global community? Apparently, we're hiding behind legal contracts and disclosure requirements and not helping each other out.
Can't wait to talk through that one with Kent, because
I probably just stirred up a huge pot right now, right? So yeah.
Okay, so while we're on the topic of making lawyers twitch,
okay, perfect, yeah.
Well,
I have to go talk to my lawyer next week. You know that, right? Like I gotta. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah. We'll have to get this approved by our legal counsel.
Here we go. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about, okay, here are things that we're trying to protect against, and doesn't it suck that we weren't able to take actions to better protect ourselves, better protect the community, all those types of things, right? And I'm curious to get your perspective on this because of how we've taken a fairly similar approach of anchoring on the business risk. And can I get you to repeat the ISO 31000 definition for a minute here?
Yep, the effect of uncertainty on objectives.
Okay, so now most of the time we're looking at in that case, the uncertain impact of a possible, negative impact to your business, right? Like whether it's data loss or outages or anything. What I've positioned a few times that again isn't terribly popular with some of the legal counsel is that, especially when it comes to compliance with obscure regulations in regions that you barely operate in, is on the flip side of things, my costs to the business of putting controls in place have a known impact from a cost or productivity or we'll say inflexibility, lack of agility, whatever you have it. Like I would always, again, translate those into dollars. I think in some organizations, and particularly ones that I'll make air quotes or more mature, because more mature doesn't always mean more secure.
Correct.
I would argue that in many cases, organizations have hit a point where certain aspects of their programs are actually having a known quantifiable impact of essentially costing the business millions or tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and lost revenue or lost opportunities to innovate by having overly restrictive controls or other things in place. So I'm curious to get your perspective on that one.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, right? Because there's a point of diminishing returns for every control that you put into place. And if the way that the control impacts the operation of the business, if it continues to show or come up as a potential block, or to your point, it's a great point, it's now reducing our ability to be creative, innovative, or expand into different markets or into different opportunities. One, the security professional who's running the show should never have let it go that far in the first place, because you should always be assessing your controls, the efficacy of the controls, and can I marry up the control to the value of the business by ensuring that the business is successful. In cases like this where the business can't expand because of X, awesome. Then wouldn't it be the right moment for that security team to sit down with the business team and with the team that wants to remove the control and understand what is the risk that we will be at if this control isn't in place? And if I'm, as an example, if I have an opportunity to expand and gain $100 million market share by removing $1 million control, and after I conduct the risk assessment, the potential for risk, I could potentially lose up to $3 million per instance. That's the decision point that the business gets to make. In the event that an incident occurs, we could suffer up to $3 million loss. But the flip side of that is, if I look at the effect of uncertainty on objectives, if I have a chance to pursue an objective and achieve a portion of $100 million market share, does that offset the risk? And that's a pure business decision, right? Not a security decision. That's a business decision. Right?
So, and I just thought of this example, and it probably is again going to make some lawyers twitch. But I imagine that was the exact math that was done in the early days of the rollout of GDPR and other privacy legislation, right? So
you betcha. Yeah.
Early days, the math was done, and they said, okay, well, it's going to cost us in fines and penalties if we don't comply. But if we if we comply with that legislation, we lose out on X. The math is simple, right? Now, again, and I think that is probably without a doubt why we've seen a bunch of the powers of punishment go way up for a lot of the regulatory bodies. Sorry, jump in.
No, and I agree. I think the flip side of continually making the decision on an ROI value only and identifying that, no, I don't want to spend any more money on security. I'm just going to pursue and I'll pay the penalty afterwards. That's terrific as long as it's just based on a particular loss event, right? So if I have one single loss event, if I do my SLE equation, I have one of those, terrific. But what happens if I also have a loss event and now I have a penalty from an enforcement perspective? As soon as you start bringing in a legislative or regulatory requirement and you're going to circumvent that by not putting a control in place to address that, the risk you run now, it isn't just the single loss event. Now it's what's the penalty. So now we go to the stick. And if the fine from the penalty is far surpasses what your market penetration could have been, those are the discussions. That's why you always have to make sure that that's a business-based discussion, because it should take into account all of that. Like, you can't just make the decision that I'm gonna remove this control because it's breaking us from getting into this one environment. Awesome, terrific. But let's understand what that control actually does. And if it's tied to legislation or regulation, if it's actually part of your 4-letter GRC framework, if it's part of that and the legal community in your organization is well aware of it and it was put in place for a particular reason, that's a different discussion now. That's kind of the CEO sit down and decide, all right, if we do this and something happens, understand this is where I do the 2:00 in the morning discussion. If something happens and it goes shitty, you're the guy. Like, understand what that means. When the phone rings and the press lines up, you're the guy in front of the cameras. I'm going to be like the Senate hearing and lean in and tell you to not say anything, but understand in front of the camera, you're the guy. And if you're good with that, so am I, because I got another meeting to go to. But understand what that means. If you've made the conscious decision to move beyond what you need to have in place from a legislative or regulatory perspective, or you're willing to accept a particular loss event that's higher than what you think it's going to be, I'm good with it because I got another meeting. As long as my check clears, I'm good. But those are business decisions, because if it was left up to security, this is easy. You get a notepad and crayon and I want it back at the end of the day. You don't get technology. I don't trust it. My tolerance for risk is just about zero. But as a business, we know it's not fair because the business has to grow. It's our job as security professionals to give them those objective data points and let them make that holistic decision for risk, not just the one level of risk.
Okay. I'm going to double click on that, and then we're going to close out on the AI discussion, because you can't have any type of article or podcast without talking about AI these days, right? So in that case, and what I've found is we've been coaching some new CIOs, new CISOs on how to approach risk management. I don't know about you, but across my career, often one of the first things that I would do is, if I was inheriting a program that hadn't made that transition to make it a business decision and a business acceptance and management of risk, was to sit down and have that discussion to say, look, I'm not going to be the one to tell you what you can or can't do. My role is to help you understand the risk, right? Help you. And that's kind of when Michael was helping us out with some of our branding and messaging, that was kind of what we landed on, is, at the heart of what we're trying to do is just help people understand their digital risk so that they can then make the informed business decisions. And so how have you been seeing that evolve across your customer base? And have you seen, because in some organizations, you may either have the business push away and say, look, this is an IT thing, IT nerds, you own the risk, you handle this. So what does that look like in discussions you've been having? Yeah,
I think earlier in my career, we had a lot of those, well, this is a security problem, you can solve the risk, right? And I remember having those discussions a lot. It's, well, this is a security problem. You guys need to deal with it. Great, then we're not. We're not going to do this. And the room would get really quiet. Well, Tim, we have to. Also, I'm not the guy. I just want to make sure I understand. You asked me to take over the risk. I said I'm not doing that. I'm actually going to sign that I'm not going to do it. And we're still going to go ahead with it. So I don't have accountability for this. Am I correct? I'm not responsible for this. Yeah, I guess so. Okay, great. Now I can help. Because if you're giving all of that to me and telling me it's on me, and we had these discussions early on, especially when I was in the telecommunications company. Well, this is a security problem. Fix it. We're not going to do it. What? No, you don't understand. Also, I'm not the guy. All right then, good enough.
Do I own it or do I not? Right?
Yeah, I guess I don't. All right then, fair enough. So now can we have a real discussion about what we're going to do to fix this? Or like, oh shit, okay, I guess we can. Yeah, great, now we can. I don't hear that as much anymore. What I do hear now, more than anything, is what do you think? And I think those are better discussions for me, because now it's like, well, Tim, what do you think? Well, this is my recommendation. Take it for what it is, but here's my recommendation. Here's how we can help reduce the risk. And it works, because now people understand that the acceptance of risk has to be at the level where it needs to be, which is in most cases at the C level. Board of directors has to get involved in some bigger decisions. Absolutely, CEOs too. But when I'm dealing with executives, the question I ask is, where do you want to go with the business? And does what you're thinking of doing, even though it's going to cause risk, is there an opportunity to expand your business positively? Yes. Great. Then what can we help you find a way to reduce that risk? And if we can't, are you still good with it? Because at the end of it, remember, you won't have, there's no net underneath you now. You'll be on your own. And if you're good with that, okay, great. So it becomes a different discussion. We're moving away from security's problem, you can fix it, or it's IT's problem, you can fix it. As soon as you put up your hand, it's not me, I'm not doing this, or this is easy, I'm not signing it. Now we have better discussions now. But I think the one thing I found is there's still this very basic understanding of the concept of risk and the impact it can have on an organization. And I've heard lots of times, well, we haven't been hit before. Great. So you can just stop paying for your car insurance, right? Because you're a good driver. You haven't had an accident before. Why pay the extra money? And I've asked that in meetings, especially with executives. And the one trick I did, and this was, I thought I was going to get fired. I asked everybody to give me the keys for their car. And I put it in a basket on the conference room table. And these this is a CEO and a bunch of board members and C-level executives. And I said, so I'm just going to toss you a set of keys and you're going to drive home. Are you good with that? Or before you go, why don't we just cancel your insurance and see if you're good? And this is in Toronto, waiting to get on the 401, right? Like we were just off the 401. And they looked at me like I was on, it looked like I was on drugs. And I went, so what you're asking me to do is exactly what I just did to you. How did it feel? And they're all like, I couldn't do it. And neither can I. And here's why. Yeah. And that changed the discussion completely, because once I brought it to a personal level and they understood that risk, I just asked them to take on a risk they weren't willing to personally accept. Awesome. Can we talk about this now from a business perspective? And here's the risk that I've identified. Can we manage this from a business level? And we actually took that risk and we went back to a lab with a vendor and spent 6 months fixing the problem before it was launched again. So they actually backed out from a launch, fixed it, and came back in. Yeah, but it took me being literally a pain in the ass in a meeting with a bunch of executives to get this point across. We needed to do this, but they needed to look at that risk from a different lens. I think we're getting more mature in that perspective for some. There are still some outliers where they still ask, why am I doing this? Because I've never been hit before. That's awesome. Are you sure? Are you sure that you've never been breached ever?
I love that, and I think that I clearly have a lot to learn from you, and maybe I need to take your course on the board and executive training, because I think it's you've shared some really great examples of how you've been able to make it real, make it understandable, make it relatable, and really draw it back to the bottom line, draw it back to the business objectives. So yes, we will definitely need to follow up. I want to hear more on how you run that course, what the content is.
Well, how about, why don't you come join me on one of them, right? Once we get one going here in Calgary, why don't you come and join one? And that way you can sit in and watch, and you can see that it isn't as scary as people think, because I don't know about you, but I've seen some of the training that's been offered to board directors and executives. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate this concept of demonstrating the diligence that you have to have as an executive. I get that. But until I can actually embrace it from a personal perspective, until I can actually see the value of what the security team is bringing in, because what I'm afraid of is we've created this divide between what security does and this mythical approach to security, and what a board is charged to do, or what executives need to do to reach their goals and objectives. There's a disconnect between the two sets of stories. And that's one of the things that Tailcraft is here for. And that's why I spelt it TALE, is learning to tell your story. So what if we can teach security professionals to tell their story in a different way? And what if we can focus on the elements of a story and make the executives the hero in the journey, so they get a chance to slay the dragon and come back to the village with newfound knowledge? But it's the journey that the executive takes to embrace what the risk is. And more importantly, what's their role in deciding the risk that they're going to accept, and what can I reduce the risk of? What can I come back to security and say, can I get you to help me with this? What if we can teach that type of story to security executives, and for that story to be heard by senior executives like board members and C-level executives? Wouldn't that be a way better meeting to have every month or every quarter between the security folks and the executives, so that you can share it and you can share the same language and you can understand the story and what everybody's part is in the story? Because right now, I don't think we have that right now.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's what you get after, what was this, 45 years in the industry?
Oh my God, the hair gets grayer. If I cut it short, you don't see the gray hair, right? That's the whole purpose, right? Cut the hair short, you don't see it. Yeah. I had to explain. Yeah, you just keep it. That's why I can't grow a beard, man, because I look like Santa Claus. That's not good. It would really be bad. I was up in Edmonton giving this workshop on how to tell a story for security professionals. And I had to sadly declare that I've been speaking in public since I was 12. So that's 50 years of speaking in public now. That scares me more than anything. I think I was speaking in public more than most people in that room have been alive. That was truly frightening for me to get to that realization. But there's a reason why I call it new skills from the old guard. It's the stuff that we have learned over 40 some years for me of experience. It's time to give it back. How can we make it so that the people who are following you and I, that next generation, they don't need to spend 44 years to get good at this? What if you and I can help them get there in 10 years? Because they have a plan. They understand that the role they're going to play is going to change over time, that they have to embrace and accept new technology. But the way you tell your story can be the same. It's just the elements in the story.
I do love that, and it's I think sorely needed, right? Like, I think that not likely. A lot of the training that exists out there for boards and executives doesn't appear to have been developed or being delivered by people that have actually worked in the industry. I mean, and I'm gonna really avoid the temptation to try and go down that rabbit hole.
I was gonna say, you're gonna be censored here right away. Yeah.
And I keep asking people, when they make decisions based on a whizzy PowerPoint deck or a good sales presentation. So the person sitting across the table from you that's giving you all of this advice on how you should spend millions of dollars on your cybersecurity program, have they worked an hour of their life in cybersecurity? Do they have any experience? Sorry,
yeah,
put a pin in that.
That's a whole that's a whole other podcast. That's something else.
Yeah.
Right?
So we'll close out with the. So tell me how does this story play out on the AI front? Because I think this strikes at the heart of both sides of that risk spectrum, right? Like we are at this point where, my mind is being blown in the potential for various aspects of AI. I think where a lot of people think the value is going to come from isn't where it's going to come from. But my mind has been blown on the potential for AI to really fundamentally change the way that we work and interact with technology. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got, all my data is getting sucked into the different models, and now we've got DeepSeek that just entered the stage.
Yeah.
But on the other end of the spectrum, we've encountered a number of companies that have basically said, look, if your product touches AI, if anyone in your company isn't actively blocked from using AI, then you can't do business with us. So how do you tell this story?
It's a good question. So I'm going to go back to over 45 years. I've watched this similar technology arc play out. So I'm going to go from when, this is going to sound, your audience is going to think I'm like an ancient person. So starting from mainframe computers in the 70s, early 80s. And then the first time we brought in an actual desktop that could interact with something other than a black screen with green letters. And then a local area network.
Okay, but you didn't start with the punch cards that...
No, I didn't. I remembered the Herman Holloway punch cards. So our job control language was a stack of punch cards that got ran every night for the billing systems that we had. Yeah, so we started with that. And what I've watched over the years and the changes in technology, it's at a point now where it's been moving astronomically fast. It exploded within the last 5 years or less. But if I look back to what AI truly is at its heart, it's input and process and output. That's it. It's just the input is able to glean like a whale going through the ocean with how much does it bring in and how much can it consume. AI doesn't have a limit to its appetite. It's based on storage. It's based on processing. The processing speed itself, the reason why it's so fantastic in the way it represents itself is that as I'm typing, it's responding and it's coming up with an answer to my question. That's fantastic. But we saw that when the internet first came out too. Mm-hmm. It's just our perception of time now has been cut. I expect my answers to be there in fractions of a second. Your children will grow up in an era with that they will not know anything other than when AI was around. Yeah. But the generation before that was the internet. Generation before that was cell phones. Before that was mainframes. Before that was, you can continue to go through this. So the way I look at AI is it's an amazing tool. It's not going to replace us. I don't think we're not going to see Schwarzenegger's universe come forward anytime soon, right? So we're not going to get there with Terminator, because
Skynet's not on the horizon.
I think what's going to happen is we're going to find first we're going to use it, we're going to be enthralled by it, then we're going to be appalled by it, and then we're going to work with it, kind of like what we did with the other piece of technology that came our way. The internet was enthralling when it first came out, and then it was appalling because of all the porn that came there, and then people were stealing stuff from us. Now we rely on the internet every day for our commerce. Mm-hmm. In fact, commerce models are built on internet, business to business, business to consumer. Same thing I think we're going to see with AI, except it's going to be faster. We're enthralled with it. We're engaged with it. We're finding unique ways with it. Some companies are appalled by it. Some are, shudder when they look at it. They want to make sure that they sanction it away from their organization. I get all of that. They're trying to reduce the risk. I get it. But there's going to be a point in time where it becomes an operational part of our organization. So how do you want to manage that? And what's the value that you see of AI within your organization? More importantly, where do you want it to help you become more effective and more efficient? Not to replace workers, not to find a better home for you and I to do something. No, what can I take away from the mundane stuff that I'm doing right now and be more exceptional in that work? Because what I've thought of is, and I look at, as an example, some of the solutions that are in place right now with some of the SIM tools, as an example. What if I could take away the literally the surveillance of hundreds of millions of pieces of data, and I can profile that pieces of data. I can identify a potential incident. I can manage it at a first level contact. And if I can't get it to first level, I'm going to escalate it to a second level with a human who gets the information. But at least I can show them what I've done. How much time have I just spent? What if I could take that operator now, who was potentially watching the screen and watching the blinking lights and doing something with it? What if now when they get an actionable piece of work to do, it's an actual event that they got to work on? Mm-hmm. Now I can take my team, I can train them to be far more specific in their skills. They can be more adaptable in the approach to take to manage an incident. And at the far end of it, they're more efficient because the majority of stuff that we see we can block, deal with, and function through. It's the stuff that requires intervention by us. What if we focus on just that and get really good at it? What could we do then with a security program? I use AI. There's a lot of Acme Corporation now in the AI engine I'm using, because I won't use my client's name and say, I need you to build something for Acme Corporation and here's what I'm looking for. And the material I get is I still have to tweak it. I still have to change it. I still have to structure it so it meets what Tailcraft requires. I'm not going to walk away from the technology, right? That'd be like putting my cell phone away. That's not going to happen. It's here. It has a role to play. But I think the trick for all of us is to figure out, outside of how unique it is and how cool it is and how new it is, what else can I get it to do that's going to help my organization or help my client's organization? How can I help it reduce risk? How can I help it to actually further the work that I need to do? And is there something that I can do that I can make sure that it's still safe to operate within the parameters for my organization, that I can accept the risks that it may bring in because I've done my homework and understood what's the risk of AI? If we can do that, that's cool, right?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, maybe to tie it all back to what we've been talking about all along, AI is just another tool. It's just another technology. It's, like you say, data in, data out. The scary thing is the speed, right? It really is, the speed, and I think a lot of people probably still don't necessarily understand what's happening. But, back to like any of the industrial revolutions, right? When you take someone from, chopping down trees with an axe and give them a chainsaw.
Yeah.
I shudder to think how many people were injured in the early days of chainsaws before the face masks and the leather chaps and all that kind of stuff, right? And I guess maybe that's what it is, right? It's about like, and that's, I guess, our role as cybersecurity professionals is to, help the business along on that journey to say, okay, you don't need to be afraid of the chainsaw. You need to respect the chainsaw. You need to have the right PPE, the protective equipment and everything. And then, the chainsaw is going to be a great tool that's going to help you, chop a lot more wood.
Absolutely. And that's the trick, is how can we as security professionals, in the stories that we tell, use analogies just like that to explain to executives the value that technologies like AI and creating your own LLM and looking at the value that quantum computing can bring to you as well over time. Can we tell those stories so that I can use that chainsaw example to walk people through? We've been through this already. In my lifetime, we've been through landlines to cell phones, mainframes to laptops to desktops to now I can work. Who would have thought 20 years ago I can sit in Starbucks? I don't have to leave as long as I want to keep drinking coffee, but I can do my day's work at a Starbucks. I mean, who would have thought that? I mean, isn't a coffee shop just for reading? No, with free Wi-Fi and a VPN, I can actually do my job, right? I can do my job. But it means that I understood what the technology can do. That's the difference, right? And I think your story about the analogy for using a chainsaw to talk about where we went from access to chainsaws, that's an awesome analogy for people to focus on, because they can see the speed now, the difference now, but the risk now. And as long as you're willing to put on the personal protective equipment, you can still use the chainsaw appropriately.
Yeah, I wish I had thought of a more elegant analogy up front. That one I
like it. I'm going to borrow it if you're okay with it. I'm going to steal that one if I can, right? So
prior to this, I was kind of using a farming analogy of the tractors, the combine, or the sides of the combine. But yeah, I think the chainsaw works. So
chainsaw works. Chainsaw works.
On that note, Tim, thank you so much for carving out the time. It was great to catch up, and I sincerely mean it when I think you opened up my eyes to just even as someone who's been in the industry for over a couple decades now, probably how much I still have to learn from you on the topic. So maybe we can do it over a pint sometime soon. So
I would appreciate that. That would be awesome. Thank you, sir, and thanks for having me on. This has been awesome.
Thanks for tuning in to Beyond Checkbox Compliance. At RESTIV, we believe cybersecurity is about empowerment, not fear. If today's conversation has resonated with you, share the episode and help spread the word, because it's time to leave checkbox security in the past. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And until next time, remember, true security isn't just about meeting standards, it's about raising. Stay secure, stay sharp, and we'll see you again soon.